Hey there, everybody. My name is Stuart Perry. I go by Mr. Stu. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, child therapist, and as of just recently, I'm an autism spectrum disorder clinical specialist, and I'm so excited that you're joining me on Bad Kids Don't Exist. Let's jump into this first episode where I talk about how I believe and know bad kids don't exist, some funny things that I've seen some kids do, and what we can do about children's mental health in the world today. I do know some things that are bad. There are some things that are bad. First off, there are some bad drivers. If you have driven anywhere, anytime recently, you know that drivers are out of control. My dad talks about it all the time, that stoplights seem to just be suggestions now, that if you run a red light within 45 seconds of it turning red, then I guess that's okay now. But just the other day, I saw someone shaving, not with an electric razor, shaving with shaving cream as they were driving. I saw another person a few weeks ago reading a book, holding the book in front of themselves like this and steering and glancing up every once in a while as they were reading a book, and not like a textbook, not that that would make it any better, but this was just like a fictional book. I don't know if they were on their way to some book club that had life or death consequences, but they were reading a book as they were driving. And then of course we've all seen the drivers who are texting or distracted or adjusting the radio or eating full 5-course meals as they're driving. Bad drivers do exist. Bad service exists. I just came back on a flight. I flew with Spirit Airlines, which is one of the biggest mistakes I have ever made in my entire life. Going down there, the service was terrible. Coming back, they lost my baggage and they were no help before, during, or after the trip whatsoever at all. Anytime I would call, they would tell me I was speaking to the wrong person and I needed to call somebody else. And then I'd call somebody else and they'd say I was speaking to the wrong person. I needed to call the first person, and then I'd call back to the first person and they told me I needed to use the chat line, and so I'd go to the chat line and the chat line told me I needed to call one of the people that I'd already called who told me I was speaking to the wrong person, and they just kept spinning me in this circle and circle and circle. They didn't find my luggage for 6 days, and then they weren't willing to compensate me the way that they said that they would compensate me for all of the expenses that I had spent. Bad service exists. And bad guacamole exists. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. I'm also a professional wrestler with a company called OVW. There's a series on Netflix called Wrestlers, and I'm in that series. One day before training, I had some guacamole that apparently had gone past its expiration date. And so as I was in the middle of a match, I started to feel my stomach grumble more and more and more. And then I took a slam, and when I took the slam, I felt a little squirt, and I realized that bad guacamole does exist. There are some bad things that exist. Bad kids just aren't one of those things. There was a mom in the airport, and she had a little boy with her, and the little boy was pulling on her water bottle on her backpack, and he was asking if mom would pick up some of the things that he was carrying, and the mom just looked back at him and she said, "No, I'm carrying some," just like that. "No, I'm carrying some things. Your dad is carrying some things, and you need to carry some things too. And if you don't stop, I will take away everything you bought at Disney and throw it away." And as I was watching this, all I could do was laugh to myself and in my head, because a few things stuck out to me. Number one, this mom was stressed out of her mind, and everything felt so out of control. Everything was feeling so out of control for her. So she was doing everything she could to try to control everything that she could. And in that moment, she was trying to control her child, trying to control everything that was going on, trying to control every move that her child was making. And in doing so, she was just getting more stressed and more aggravated, more frustrated. Number two is this kid is 4 years old. If you're watching him and trying to find something of him doing something wrong, you're going to find it, especially if you're staring at him like she was staring at him and waiting for the next moment that she could correct him and go off again. And third and finally, and this is the thing that really made me laugh, is you bought the stuff at Disney. He didn't buy the stuff at Disney. You bought it. This 4-year-old does not have any money or anything that you didn't give him. So if you're going to take all that stuff and throw it away, I know that you think it's important because you spent all this money and maybe you spent the energy to pick it all out or whatever it might be. But to this child, it's just, okay, well, mom threw away some stuff that mom bought. But in this moment, this mom was just believing that her child was bad. And maybe he was doing some things that were disruptive, and maybe he was doing some things that were annoying, but the child was not bad. What if we just chose to believe that kids are doing the best that they know how to do? And yeah, they are going to make mistakes. Yes, they're going to do some things that we find annoying or disruptive or wrong or incorrect or even bad choices. Bad choices exist. But what if we still chose to believe that even during the bad choices, even during the disruptions, even during the difficulties, even during the annoyances, that kids were doing the best they know how to do? There's a psychologist, his name is Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller is no longer with us, but he created something that is now called Miller's Law. And Miller's Law says this: in order to understand what another person is saying, you must assume that it is true and find out what it could be true of. Here's what that means, is that we can believe that children are doing the best they know how to do. And yes, they might have some skills in their head that they're not using at any given time. Or yes, they may have known better. Or yes, they may have learned better, or whatever it might be. Or maybe that's not the way you raised your child, whatever it might be. But in that moment, what if you just chose to believe that even though they've learned all those things, even though all those things are there, they're still doing the best they know how to do? We can believe that kids are being truthful in the fact that they are doing the best they know how to do at that given moment. If you'll do that, it can decrease so much frustration. I want to show you a picture that I took in my office one day after a session. I'd like to know what you think of it. What thoughts come to your mind as you look at this? Is it that, oh, this child must have been so destructive and so disruptive and so bad and so wrong, and they were making terrible, horrible, no good, very bad choices? You see all of those toys thrown everywhere, and those toys were all organized in bins on my shelves, and everything was set up for this child. And then they came in, they dumped out so many different things, and they scattered it all around, and they laid in it, and they swirled it around, and they threw some things. What do you think when you see those pictures? What do you see when you look at those pictures? I want to show you what it is I see when I look at these pictures. It's this part here. It's all these toys that didn't get thrown. All these toys that were left completely untouched. Why? Not because the child didn't want to touch them, but the moment they touched them, I said, those aren't for dumping. And they stopped and they went to the ones that were allowed to be dumped, that were allowed to be thrown. So maybe you've been spending too much time focused on all of the things your child is doing wrong, or all of the things that the children you work with are doing wrong. Can you refocus and see that in every moment they are doing the best they know how to do? What if we just believed that kids are doing the best they know how to do? And that leads me to my next question. Why is it that we should care about children's mental health? Why bother? Let me tell you a reason that I hear often that I completely disagree with. It is not important to care about children's mental health just so that we can say that kids can do whatever they want because of a disability. What I try to explain to parents, to caregivers, teachers, administrators, whoever it is I'm working with, is that mental health difficulties can explain, but they do not excuse disruptive behaviors. Let me say it again for the people in the back. Mental health difficulties and disorders can explain, but do not excuse disruptive behaviors. So if you're thinking that I'm just some person who's saying like, oh, kids should be able to do whatever they want without any consequences, that is completely incorrect. Because mental health difficulties, disorders, disruptions, whatever it might be, they can explain, but they do not excuse disruptive behaviors. So then why care? Why care about children's mental health? Here's one thing that maybe you don't know. 8 in 10 teachers say that they have to address students' behavioral issues at least a few times a week. 8 out of 10, that's 80% of teachers, say that at least a few times a week they have to address students' behavioral issues. 58% say it happens every single day. That means that if you're interacting with kids at all, chances are you are interacting with at least a few kids who might be struggling. And why do I say struggling? Because I choose to believe that at all times kids are doing the best they know how to do. Even when they're disruptive, I believe they're doing the best they know how in that moment. Here's another reason you might want to care about children's mental health. Maybe it's that you want your child to succeed in school, or maybe you're a teacher who wants your students to succeed. Here's something maybe you didn't know. The 3 most important aspects of learning, attention, focus, and memory, are controlled by our emotions, not the cognitive part of our brain. So if you're wanting students to succeed, you have to support their mental health. You have to support their emotional well-being in order for them to be able to learn. When children's mental health isn't supported, when their emotional center isn't supported, it's not that they're unwilling, it's that they are unable to learn, because attention and focus and memory are controlled in that emotional center, not the cognitive part of the brain. Here's another reason that maybe you should care about children's mental health. It's that globally, nearly 15% of young people ages 10 to 19 experience a mental health disorder. That is 13% of the global burden of disease. So of all the disease in that age group, 13% of it is related to mental health. 15% experience a mental health disorder. That's actually meeting criteria. And I would argue that so many more kids are dealing with difficulties. Here's another reason that maybe you'd want to care about children's mental health. Mr. Rogers, who is one of my idols, I just think he is, or was, absolutely amazing. He said this: "That which is human is able to be discussed." Why care about children's mental health? Because if we can normalize it, if we can discuss it, we can decrease the stress that's associated with it. When something's unable to be discussed, it causes tension, and that tension will come out somewhere, somehow. I don't know how it's going to come out for the children that you work with or the child that you have, but when there is all that tension build up, it is going to come out. How and when and where, are all up to the tension. But that tension is going to come out. And so if we can discuss these issues related to children's mental health, we can decrease that stress, bring down that tension, and help children tolerate and regulate these difficulties. At the start of every therapy session that I have, I ask my clients 3 different questions. Since the last time I saw you, have you wanted to harm yourself? Since the last time I saw you, have you wanted to harm other people? And since the last time I saw you, have you wished you'd fall asleep and never wake up? Sometimes when parents hear those questions, they panic because they think, oh my goodness, you're going to put these ideas in my kid's head and they're going to start thinking about hurting themselves. And research shows that's not the case. The reason I ask that question every single time is so that if a child starts to feel that way, they know they can discuss it with me. Because I ask about it every time. It's just become commonplace for me to ask those questions. Discussing mental health is the same way. If we make it commonplace, if we normalize it, then children will know it's okay to talk about those things. That when they're feeling difficult feelings, having difficult thoughts, they're able to share those things. They don't have to hold them in. They're able to let it out, and that brings down that stress, brings down that tension. When it's discussed and validated, it's able to be understood and tolerated and regulated. Imagine if you went to a doctor and you say, I have a fever, I'm throwing up, and I have diarrhea. Well, the doctor may look back at you and say, oh, sounds like the flu. Or maybe you go to the doctor and you say, my throat really hurts, and I've been coughing up this stuff. The doctor may say, oh, you have strep throat. Or you go to the doctor and you've got some goo on your eye. The doctor may look at you and say, you need to leave, you have pink eye. Whatever it might be, the doctor can tell you what it is that's going on. But now imagine you go to the doctor and you list all your symptoms and the doctor looks back at you and says, I have no idea what that is. And you're thinking, but it's what's going on. It's what's happening to me. It's what's happening inside of me. And the doctor's like, nope, I've never heard of it. How stressed, how tense would you be? With children, it's the same way. When they feel big feelings, when they have tough thoughts, if they go to someone and share those things and the person's like, I have never ever heard of that, or they look at them and they say, you are weird for thinking that, you are weird for feeling that, then that child, their stress, their tension goes way up. But imagine a child comes and shares their experience and the person who they share it with is able to look at them and be like, oh yeah, it's tough, but it is normal. We're going to need to work through it, but trust me, other people have done it too. Now that stress and that tension come way down. So why care about children's mental health? Because if we normalize it, we can decrease the stress and the tension associated with it. Here's a diagram that I show in a lot of my trainings. It's this tree with the roots and some fruit coming off of it. I say that it's so important to target the root, not just the fruit. I was at a grocery store not long ago and there was a man on a call and he had his AirPods in and he was walking around and making his call and talking. He was not standing there with the speakerphone on or anything like that. He had his headphones in and he's just talking and having his conversation as he shops. He wasn't in the checkout line or anything like that. And he wasn't blocking anybody. He wasn't holding anybody up. He was actually flying through that place. And at one point, somebody looked at him and said, excuse me, you need to end that call. And he looked back at them and he said, you are worried about the wrong thing. Isn't it true that there are so many times we're worried about the wrong thing? If you can see it, it's not the problem. It may be a problem, but it's not the problem because behavior is always an outward expression of what's going on inside. So if you can see it, it's not the problem. If we'll target the root, then any of those other things that might pop up don't have the energy to pop up anymore because we've eliminated whatever the actual problem is. We've started to, quote unquote, worry about the right thing. So why care about children's mental health? Because if we believe that children are doing the best they know how to do, and there's still difficulties, then that must mean there's something going on. If we follow Miller's Law and we say that in order for us to understand what another person is saying, or in order for us to understand children, we just have to assume that whatever they're saying is true and find out what it is true of, then we're going to be targeting the roots, not just the fruits. If we can understand and support and celebrate differences rather than forcing kids to conform to some certain one ideal, imagine how much brighter our world could be. For some reason, we've decided that we need to control or to medicate kids so they all conform to one idea of what we think a kid should be. But there are no bad kids. There's lots of misunderstood kids. And I believe that we can work together to understand them. That's why I'm here. That's why Bad Kids Don't Exist exists, is so that I can help adults better understand kids. Because if I can help adults better understand kids, then together we can create environments where kids and their caregivers can thrive. So, will you choose to believe it with me? Some things exist, some things just don't. Bad kids don't exist.